Dr. Hooker, you encourage us to learn to distinguish between story and narrative. Mm-hmm. And that naturally leads a preacher to wonder, well, I know the story of Jesus. Mm-hmm. What would be different about the narrative of Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Jesus' story, we listen to and we hear different parts of it from those who were reporters at the time. You know, there's the truth of Jesus according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. But the narrative of Jesus is almost, it's somewhat like a hero's journey, where an unsuspecting chap finds resources, both friends and a scripture or a text or something like this, and they set off into this magical time to change the world and to have great challenges. They have some successes, they have some failures, and then eventually they return home changed. That's the hero's journey. Jesus was actually on a classic hero's journey. Now, what other people need to understand is there's a narrative that places them in different places on that journey, which is why Jesus invited them near the end of his ministry to change the narrative that they were living inside of. He said, for the first 3 years of our time together, you've been living inside of the narrative of disciple, which means you stayed behind me, you followed me, you listened, and you learned the discipline and the teaching, and you learned the prayer that I've taught you all to pray. At this point, things have changed significantly enough that the world can't be transformed by disciples. I now need you to become my friends. What would a friend do? A friend would be one who would lay down their life. What's in a friend narrative? A friend is one who would go off and tell the stories and share about what their friend has done, and they would build other relationships, and they'd build them on the principles of this one lasting friendship. And so just in shifting how they spoke about one another, they changed from a disciple narrative to a friend narrative in a way that would cause them to be different, in the same way that Jesus invited people into a narrative. Bread, word, water, there's an understanding that's associated inside of each of those, so that you can understand how I might relate to this one. And what would water do for me? It would cleanse me, it would refresh me, it would carry me into new and different spaces. What would bread do for me? What would seed do for me? And so Jesus consistently invited people to understand his relationship with them and his relationship with God based on these various narratives that allowed people to notice inside of those what it is that Jesus does. Which is also why when Jesus said, I'm going to be killed, they rejected that idea because Messiah was supposed to reign. The narrative that they had of Messiah was one who would overtake, overthrow, and reign for 1,000 years. And when he says, I have to reverse this understanding for you of Messiah in order to reverse the understanding of how salvation will come, it shook them. But then it invited them to live inside of a new and different narrative. And it was only then that they could find their way into the real way of Christ.